It was supposed to be a regular night, a pizza delivery, a tip, and a customer waiting at the door. But what happened next would shock not only the victim, but an entire community. A woman, a pregnant woman, was brutally attacked in her own home, all because of a $2 tip. The aftermath of this horrific crime would make headlines and leave the world asking one question: what could possibly drive someone to take such a drastic, violent action over something so small? Before we get into today's story, I want to take a moment to remind you of something. If you're as hooked on true crime as I am, and you love diving into shocking, real-life mysteries, then you've come to the right place. But there's a catch. You don't want to miss out on the next gripping case. So, if you haven't already, take a second to hit that like button. It's the best way to show your support and keep us going. And while you're at it, subscribe to Crime in a Tale, where we unravel the darkest corners of real-life stories. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when our next jaw-dropping true crime tale is released. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, with that said, let's dive back into this unbelievable case. The sun had just set in Kissimmee, Florida. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional car driving by. Inside a small motel room, 28-year-old Jessica Daniels and her boyfriend, along with their young daughter, were waiting for dinner. They had ordered pizza from a local restaurant. It was a simple order: a large pizza, some soda, and a couple of sides. Nothing special. Just dinner. They didn't expect the events that would unfold later. A simple transaction gone wrong. Brianna Alvelo, a 22-year-old pizza delivery driver, had just finished her shift. She grabbed the order, a typical Friday night delivery, and headed out in her car. Brianna had been working at the pizzeria for a few months now, and while her job wasn't glamorous, she had grown accustomed to the usual routine. Drive, deliver, get paid, go home. It was a job, and it paid the bills. When Brianna arrived at Jessica's motel room, she knocked on the door, ready to complete the transaction. Jessica greeted her, and as usual, handed over the payment, including the tip. However, Brianna's face fell when she saw that the tip was only $2. The $2 tip to most, $2 wouldn't seem like a lot to fight over. But Brianna, feeling slighted by the small amount, couldn't let it go. She slammed the pizza box onto the counter, staring at Jessica with a mix of anger and disbelief. Jessica, surprised by the reaction, tried to apologize, explaining that she didn't have much cash and could only offer what she had. But Brianna's irritation only grew. "You can't even give me a decent tip for doing my job," Brianna muttered, her voice low but filled with venom. She stood there for a moment, staring at Jessica, as if weighing something in her mind. Then, without warning, she stormed off, leaving Jessica confused and a little uneasy. A night of horror hours passed. The pizza had been eaten. The family settled in for the night. But Brianna couldn't shake the incident. The tip, or lack thereof, kept playing over and over in her mind. It was more than just money. It felt like disrespect, like an insult to her hard work. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She wasn't just frustrated with the tip. She was angry at the world for treating her this way. Her emotions had been building up for weeks: stress at work, financial struggles, and a feeling of being overlooked. Then came the decision. Brianna was going to return. She would show Jessica how she felt about the $2 tip. But this time, she wasn't just going to yell. She was coming back with a weapon. A brutal encounter. Brianna returned to the motel, this time accompanied by a man she knew, an accomplice who was also part of the chaos unfolding. Brianna had a knife, a large, serrated blade that glinted under the streetlights. She and the man knocked on the door, this time with a much darker intention. Jessica opened the door, not expecting anything more than a repeat of the earlier encounter. But Brianna wasn't there for a tip anymore. She was there for revenge. Before Jessica could react, Brianna forced her way inside, pushing the door open with brutal force. The man followed her in, and within seconds, Brianna was on top of Jessica, stabbing her repeatedly. The first blow landed on Jessica's stomach, then another on her side. She tried to scream, to fight back, but the pain was overwhelming. Jessica's boyfriend attempted to intervene, but he was quickly overpowered by the accomplice. Brianna continued to stab Jessica, 14 times in total, each stab delivering a surge of pain and shock. Blood spilled across the room. Jessica collapsed onto the floor, struggling to stay conscious. Her vision blurred as she gasped for air, feeling weak and lightheaded. Her boyfriend managed to break free from the accomplice and rushed to help her. He called 911, desperately trying to stop the bleeding while comforting Jessica. Through the pain, Jessica realized something else. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a shockwave, and in that moment, all she could think about was her unborn child. The ambulance arrived, and Jessica was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save both her life and the life of her baby. It would be a long recovery, both physically and emotionally, but Jessica would survive. The police were quick to launch an investigation. Detectives combed through the motel's security footage, eventually identifying Brianna as the attacker. She had been seen leaving the motel after delivering the pizza, but what wasn't seen was the return trip. The footage revealed the moment Brianna and her accomplice stormed into the room. Brianna's motive became clear. It wasn't just the tip, it was her anger, her frustration with life, and her need to lash out at someone who, in her mind, had wronged her. The authorities quickly tracked down Brianna, who was arrested and charged with attempted murder, armed robbery, and home invasion. She had no remorse when arrested, only stating that she didn't think things would go that far. As the investigation unfolded, authorities began to piece together Brianna's life. It wasn't just the $2 tip that set her off. It was the culmination of years of emotional stress, a history of anger, and a deep sense of being wronged by the world around her. Brianna had struggled with her personal life. From a broken family to financial difficulties, she had never quite been able to get ahead. She was stuck in a dead-end job, delivering pizzas to make ends meet, and that small tip, in her mind, represented more than just money. It was a symbol of how little people cared about her. Brianna's history was troubling. Neighbors described her as a quiet woman, someone who kept to herself. But those who knew her best saw a different side. She had a temper, quick to flare up at small things, and when it came to rejection or feeling unappreciated, she became volatile. It was this volatility, combined with the anger she had been bottling up for years, that led her to make the shocking decision to attack Jessica that night. As Jessica lay in the hospital, fighting for her life, the reality of her ordeal began to settle in. She had been stabbed 14 times, each wound a testament to the violence of that night. Yet, the physical scars weren't the only ones she would carry. The emotional weight was crushing. She had been so close to death, so close to losing her unborn child, that every moment felt like a nightmare. But Jessica's resilience shone through. The doctors managed to stabilize her condition, and slowly, over the course of weeks, she began to heal. However, her emotional journey was only just beginning. As she lay in the hospital bed, replaying the attack in her mind, she couldn't shake the thought of what Brianna had taken from her. Not just her sense of safety, but her peace of mind. The attack had been random. It had been senseless. It had been all because of a $2 tip. Through her pain, Jessica had a difficult realization. The world could change in an instant, and people's lives could be altered forever by a single moment of violence. But as she held on to her daughter, and as she felt her baby kick inside of her, she knew she had to fight. For herself, for her family, and for her future. While Jessica fought for her life in the hospital, law enforcement worked tirelessly to locate Brianna. The clues were there, but the manhunt was anything but easy. Brianna had gone into hiding, her face plastered on every news channel, and detectives scoured the area for any sign of her. But Brianna was on the run, avoiding the police and trying to stay out of sight. It wasn't until the following week that a tip came in. A local resident had seen Brianna in a nearby town, acting suspiciously. Law enforcement immediately jumped into action, and a SWAT team was deployed. They tracked her down at a rundown apartment complex, and after a brief standoff, Brianna was arrested. When Brianna was brought in for questioning, she didn't seem remorseful. She was cold, almost indifferent to the fact that she had tried to kill another human being. In her eyes, it seemed like she had done what she needed to do to make herself feel better. It wasn't about the tip anymore. It was about her inability to control her emotions, her frustration with life, and the need to act on it. The courtroom was filled with tension when Brianna's trial began. Jessica was there, a survivor and a mother-to-be, sitting at the front of the room, facing the woman who had nearly taken everything from her. Brianna sat across from her, her expression blank, like she hadn't even considered the gravity of her actions. The prosecution presented a strong case. They painted Brianna as a woman who, under the guise of a minor inconvenience, $2, had let her deep-seated frustrations and emotional instability boil over. The defense, on the other hand, tried to argue that Brianna wasn't in full control of her actions, citing her history of mental health struggles and a difficult upbringing. Jessica took the stand, her voice shaking as she relived the horrors of that night. She described how Brianna had attacked her, stabbing her without any warning. She spoke of her unborn child, how she feared for the life of her baby as the blood poured from her wounds. And she spoke of the lasting emotional trauma she now had to live with. The jury listened intently, and when it came time for closing statements, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Brianna had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The jury deliberated for hours before coming to a unanimous decision. Brianna Alvelo was guilty of attempted murder, armed robbery, and home invasion. The sentencing would be swift. Brianna was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Jessica, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. She had survived, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would never go away. Brianna's actions had changed her life forever, but Jessica had fought for her life and for her unborn child. The court's decision was a small measure of justice, but the real victory came in the form of survival. As Brianna was led away in handcuffs, Jessica watched, knowing that her life would never be the same. But she also knew that she had the power to move forward, to rebuild, and to find peace, something Brianna had lost long before that fateful night. While Brianna sat in jail, awaiting her trial, the world around her moved on. Life outside of prison continued without her. Brianna had left behind a small, unremarkable life, one of hardship, isolation, and a sense of alienation that had slowly eaten away at her. To her family and friends, Brianna had been a quiet, hard-working woman, someone who kept her distance, never quite opening up about the growing anger inside. But the truth was, her violent outburst that night hadn't come from nowhere. The emotional pain had been building for years. Brianna's family struggled to make ends meet, and growing up, she'd felt overlooked. Her dreams of a better life had slowly faded, replaced by the harsh reality of her dead-end job and her increasing bitterness toward a world that seemed to pass her by. No one knew just how much Brianna had been hurting. It wasn't just the tip, it was everything. Her entire existence had been like a pressure cooker, and when the lid was forced off that night, the violence erupted. As Jessica recovered physically, she began to confront the emotional scars left by the attack. Her stitches had healed, but her mind was a battleground. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the cold blade against her skin, the sensation of blood pooling beneath her. It was like an endless loop she couldn't escape from. The nightmares started soon after the attack. At night, Jessica would wake up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath, convinced that Brianna was there, coming for her again. She struggled to get back to normal life, to find peace in a world that had suddenly turned unpredictable and dangerous. But with the support of her boyfriend and her daughter, Jessica started to reclaim her sense of safety. News of the attack spread quickly, and the community of Kissimmee was left reeling. How could something so horrific happen over a tip? It didn't make sense to anyone. People who knew Jessica were horrified to think that someone could be so consumed with anger over such a small issue. Brianna's actions shook the community to its core, leaving a trail of confusion, disbelief, and sorrow. Many in the area began to rally behind Jessica. People who didn't even know her began offering support, financial donations, letters of encouragement, and even flowers. They wanted her to know that she wasn't alone, that there were people who cared about her. As the trial drew closer, the support for Jessica only grew stronger, as her story became a symbol of survival and strength. As Brianna sat in her cell, awaiting her trial, she had time to think. Was it worth it? Was the violence worth the tiny insult of a $2 tip? Her mind, once clouded with anger and frustration, began to clear as she confronted the truth. She realized that nothing she had done could undo the damage. The life she had so recklessly thrown away was gone, and in its place was a prison sentence that would last until the day she died. The stark reality of her actions began to sink in. Brianna would never be able to make up for what she had done to Jessica, nor could she ever fully explain why she had acted in such a violent way. Brianna's heart ached with the realization that her anger had led her to destroy 2 lives, Jessica's and her own. And for what? A moment of misplaced rage? As the trial loomed closer, the tension was palpable. Jessica would take the stand once more, recounting the horrors she'd faced, but now she had a new layer of strength. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. She was prepared to speak the truth, to make sure that Brianna could never hurt anyone again. The courtroom was packed as Jessica entered, her presence commanding respect. As she testified, she didn't just describe the night of the attack. She shared her journey of healing, of overcoming the pain, of reclaiming her life. Her words weren't just a testimony. They were a message to every survivor out there, reminding them that they too could survive, they too could move on. The jury deliberated for what seemed like hours, and when they returned, everyone in the room was on edge. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on all counts, there was a collective sigh of relief. Jessica had won the fight, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been victimized by senseless violence. The judge sentenced Brianna to life in prison, with no chance of parole. For the first time in a long while, Jessica allowed herself to breathe a little easier. Justice had been served, but she knew that true healing would take time. As the months passed, Jessica's life slowly began to take shape again. She had moved to a new apartment with her boyfriend and daughter, and while the scars from that fateful night would never disappear, Jessica was determined to move forward. She found comfort in small things, her daughter's laughter, the quiet moments at home, and the knowledge that she had survived the unthinkable. Jessica also began to speak out for other victims of violence. She became an advocate for survivors, using her platform to raise awareness about domestic violence and the importance of empathy and understanding. While she would always carry the trauma, Jessica had found a way to use her experience to help others. As we reach the end of this shocking and heartbreaking story, one thing is clear: violence, no matter how small the trigger, can destroy lives in an instant. But it's also a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is strength in survival, hope in healing, and power in reclaiming one's life. Jessica's journey is proof that no matter what life throws at you, you can rise above it and come out stronger on the other side. If this story has left you reflecting on the fragility of life and the choices we make sure to like this video and share it with others who need to hear it. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to Crime and a Tale for more gripping true crime stories, where the real drama unfolds and the truth always finds its way to the surface. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more chilling tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.